Welcome to CX&Chill, the real, raw customer experience podcast from Exo Studios and Extendops. Today, host Sean McCreery explores the incredible career journey of Elena Bernardo, SVP of Operations at HelloFresh. Join them as they explore diverse topics, from enhancing customer experience in the financial industry, leveraging the power of AI to better understand customers, and redefining personalization in today's dynamic landscape. CX&Chill starts now.
And action. Well, I'm excited. I'm finally here hosting CX&Chill. Camera one or camera two? Camera one. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm finally hosting CX&Chill. And I'm here with my good friend, Elena Bernardo.
That's right. Happy to be here.
So I was nervous about the last name pronunciation.
That's okay. You aced it.
So Elena, thank you so much for coming here. I know we're in Vegas, even though I don't know if you can tell by the backdrop. We're here at the Cosmo, my favorite hotel here. But Elena, I'd love to hear, maybe just to get things started, you have an insanely impressive background. Walk us through sort of your story.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say I did it all intentionally and it was all planned out, and it really wasn't. A lot of it was just being at the right place at the right time. And I think looking out for opportunities. I studied at Brown University in Providence and wanted to move to New York City. I think that's where everybody at the time wanted to move. And the Wall Street scene was popping, and my first job was on Wall Street. I worked in mortgage-backed security trading. It was a crazy time, but what I remember is just working a lot, right? I think a lot of people have a very glamorized image of what that is, but a lot of it is just plain hard work, and a lot of best practices that carried me through my career. I didn't want to stay in banking, so I later went to consulting and wound up eventually at Amazon.
Wow, okay.
Right. Which again, was a series of semi-intentional, semi-accidental steps, but really wanted to get in with a technology company because I saw that was the kind of the way the world was bending, and a lot of interesting changes and innovations were coming from the tech space. And, at the time I thought Amazon was leading the charge. I was living in London at the time and moved to Luxembourg with them, and then moved to Seattle, where I still lived.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was a huge kind of shift back, almost like a reverse culture shock, because at that time I had been living in Europe for more than 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. And, one thing led to another, but, during COVID, I joined HelloFresh, which was absolutely exploding at the time. It was meeting the moment during COVID. People didn't want to go to grocery stores. They didn't even want to leave the house. And as a meal kit subscription company that came straight to people's doors, they were just needing to grow in logistics and fulfillment in every single function.
Yep.
And we acquired a lot of companies. And I think this is when the role of customer experience really came into light.
So your story, though, your background, because you were very sort of modest, I think, in sharing that. But if my memory serves me correct, so you finish your graduate degree at Brown, and then you go to Goldman Sachs and do the whole MBS thing there, which was crazy at that time.
Yep.
From there, you spent some time at this kind of no-name company called McKinsey, right? I think I've heard of them before.
Yeah,
and you were there for about a
I was
decade,
there for
right?
for almost a decade, 9
Wow.
years. Yeah.
And then from there, then it was hey, I'm kind of getting interested in the tech front, and I see a lot happening there, and that's sort of what prompted the move to Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely. Most people come to McKinsey for the 2-year associate experience, and I actually loved it because I thrive on change and I thrive on variety.
Yeah.
And I think for someone who likes that pace and is a bit of an adrenaline junkie, because on the inside I am, there's no better place.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's if you want to be told hey, next Monday you start in this city with this client, off you go, and you like that kind of surprise element. I just loved it. And I ended up staying and moving to different roles and moving to different cities. And before I knew it, I had been there 9 years.
That's crazy.
And I was very happy there, actually.
Is it easy to survive at McKinsey for that long?
I think if you're persistent,
Yeah,
you can do it. And if you are willing to deal with a lot, right? But, stay positive through it, deal with change well, right? I think if people have a very rigid sense of what they want their career experience to be, it's probably not going to work out, right? Because no one can tell you or promise you that this is what the next 2 years are going to look like.
Yeah.
And it just all plays out. So I think it worked for me.
So what was sort of like that final moment at McKinsey? Like, you're what, I've been here, done that. Like, I'm ready to go to Amazon.
I'll be honest with you. It was, when Amazon approached me, which was through a recruiter, actually, they were offering a role that was a people management role. And consultants are rarely people managers. We manage small case teams, 3 to 4 people here and there. And, maybe you're leading several case teams by the time you're senior in the company. But what Amazon was offering was a role that had hundreds of people in my span of control and had, scope across multiple countries. And they said because I had a lot of functional skill sets, the people management side could be learned. I thought that was brilliant and very, risk loving of them, so to say, because to hire someone who has really no track record in people management and give them a people management role on the expectation that you can be effective and they will help and support you to be effective was, at the time, I thought that was almost like a life-changing proposal. And I was really happy to take them up on that. And I thought if they take a risk on me, I'll take a risk on them.
That's pretty cool. So
Yeah.
so before you got while you're at McKinsey, so that's sort of what prompted the move there,
Yeah.
to Amazon. But at McKinsey, how much did you touch the CX world? Jesus.
A fair amount. We
Yeah.
were doing a lot of process improvement, and because of my background in securities, right, in Goldman Sachs and that whole world, I was doing a lot with banking and customer experience in banking.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. So the customer center world is huge, and some banking products are very complex, and lots of moments of truth in
Sure.
CX, as you know,
Sure.
right? And some very, positive and negative moments. I mean, I remember there were moments where we were working on collections and recoveries processes, basically working out payment plans with customers who were under financial stress. And those are very challenging conversations, very, very challenging moments,
Yeah,
some
I can
very,
imagine.
very high stakes moments. We're talking about people's homes,
Yeah.
mortgages and all of those things. So I learned CX at its trickiest, right? And, at moments where you can come through for a person and really help them get through a hardship,
Sure.
right? So I think I learned CX from a very difficult industry angle and a very different industry angle than the one I work in now.
Yeah, financial services are not an easy place to get started in the
Yeah.
CX world, is my understanding. And you have all the fun infosec stuff that comes with that as well, and it's pretty regulated.
Absolutely, very regulated, very specific about what you can and can't do, and it's even gotten more complex. I think now the world is even more complicated than it was like 10 years ago when I
Oh
did
my
this.
gosh, yeah. We're getting to experience a lot of that fun stuff right now with taking on different accounts and going into work from home. It's there's a lot more things that need to be done than there were in the past, but understandably so. So right, so you join Amazon and you're moving around a little bit, right? You
Yeah.
actually weren't back stateside; you were still in Europe, right?
I was in Europe from 2014 to 2017 with Amazon.
Nice. Was
Yeah.
that what was? Did you like Amazon Europe style or like stateside?
I think it's more corporate
Yeah.
in Seattle. I think in Europe it was still very much a startup and a much lesser known company. And it sounds weird to say that because now Amazon is such a household name. But I think during that time among European countries, it was very much a startup
Yeah.
and much lesser known. And e-commerce in general was still kind of going through the adoption curve. People were still learning how to shop online and to trust it because it's the consumer practices are to shop in local stores. And, I think it was going through that development curve where people were learning about the possibilities of e-commerce. And it was very exciting. We did a lot of change programs during that time. And then when I moved to the US in 2017, it was still Amazon, but it was almost like a totally different company moving to HQ. I remember when I joined, it was 2 days of back-to-back interviews. You
Wow.
hardly got a break. But at the end, these are the people who will advocate for you. and they will help you be successful. And they, through that process, become vested in your success. And even though right now, people might say, well, that's overkill, or why do you need it to be that long?
Yeah.
It actually paid a lot of dividends in the end.
And so like, in just our conversations, I know you sort of specialize in logistics. Now, when did you start getting into that world? Was that sort of McKinsey days, or was that sort of what you started touching on Amazon?
I think logistics and customer service have a lot in common.
Yeah, they
People
do.
always flip out when I say that, but you know, process matters and data matters. And I think these are both fields where there's a data rich environment, a lot of, working with large data sets and making daily decisions,
Yeah.
right? At very kind of minute level, but it all ratchets up to a delivery experience or a customer experience. So in logistics, we talk about delivery experience, which is the whole, did it come on time? What condition did the box arrive in? Is it, delightful to open it? What is the in-home experience with it? How do you message people? How do you chat people up when something is going to be late? How do you handle changes on the fly? So this whole world.
So was Amazon already like thinking about that? Because I know you
Well,
were you were joining them right when things were heating up. Was like that whole concept of delivery experience something that was already being
I
prioritized?
think it was already being prioritized, and I worked in two different transportation or logistics related teams in Amazon, and they both were looking at ways to take more control of the delivery experience and to make it that's something that is a unique core asset to Amazon. So taking much more control of activities that used to be outsourced to third parties,
Makes sense.
right? And they wanted to control everything, and they had an expertise in tech, so they could build the tech to control it. And I think this was really their source of competitive advantage. So, when I came to HelloFresh, I already had that background in logistics and also the background from McKinsey and just data driven process excellence.
Yeah.
Right. And being tech forward, not being afraid or running away from new technologies, but actually dabbling with them proactively and seeing what they can do for you. So I think a lot of the intrinsics were already there when I came to HelloFresh.
So pretty applicable transition then from Amazon sort of focusing on that delivery experience and being very data driven across sort of the entire process, and then going to HelloFresh. And
100%.
you're right
A
there.
hundred.
And
Yeah.
my understanding is you went to HelloFresh like right before COVID started,
It was,
or was
it
it
was
mid COVID,
COVID. It was early COVID.
early COVID?
This was like, we're talking pre-vaccine, so there was no vaccine available. It was the days where social distancing was sort of like manifesting, right? And everything was about 6 feet apart. That's really hard to do in a distribution center environment.
Yeah, I can
So
imagine.
yeah, so our productivity went down. People who were sick had to quarantine for a week. I mean, you'll remember the rules were incredibly stringent, and people were very risk averse. So, we could shut down entire departments. People stopped going to work. Everything had to be done remotely. So the company was just changing the way it worked in the context of like doubling demand.
Yeah, that's what
It-
I'm curious about
yeah.
is that you have, I mean, consumer behavior fundamentally changed during COVID, or at least I think it was already happening, but I keep hitting this thing. Yeah, it already, I mean, it was already changing, but I mean, I think COVID certainly accelerated. I mean, the example I always give is, yeah, I went up to Seattle actually, and I
Yeah.
was visiting my grandfather, and he's like 90 years old, and he's using Instacart, and he's ordering,
Mm.
and he's never, he'd always gone to Costco or something like that, and he's using Instacart now. So I mean, just like even seeing my own family and just like tangible examples of how something like that more or less changed how he bought things, and he had that experience, and he had a good delivery experience. It sounds like, and sure enough, yeah, that's how we got groceries.
Yeah.
From that point forward.
Yeah, we saw that. We saw so many new customers that we acquired just organically. We didn't have to invest a lot in marketing because people were flocking to a product that, allowed them to shop from home.
Yeah.
This was the whole e-commerce boom, and we felt it at HelloFresh, but certainly the industry felt it overall as well. And we had to completely change to scale for just for the level of interest,
Yeah.
because processes that maybe work well for 10,000 people don't work for 100,000, and even if it worked for 100,000, it may not work for a million. And you have to be really watching out for what are the inflection points where manual processes break, where certain errors that used to be just, small things now become highly visible and happen often enough that you can't sweep them under the rug anymore.
Yeah.
You got to address them
So you're in this
fundamentally.
environment when you join. It's already sort of like early COVID days,
Mm,
where the 6 feet was, very much in place. So you have demand more or less probably more than doubling at that point
yeah.
with very limited marketing spend. But then you also have sort of the back end operational complexities where, hey, everyone's got a quarantine, like we can't have people in this
Yeah.
warehouse or something like that. So how do you sort of balance those two, or how did you balance those two at the time?
I mean, some people, to be honest, it was brute force in some cases, and people worked incredibly hard. I mean, I think the burnout that came after COVID was a real thing
Sure.
because people were just, flat out working and sometimes without weekends, making that choice because it was the right thing to do for customers. And we chose not to turn away customers. Um, I think we fortunately were able to move customer care to a remote environment fairly quickly. We had to buy a lot of equipment and take care of security requirements and
Sure.
make sure everyone had a professional setup. But we made that investment and, made that transition. But, for other functions, it was a multi-month journey to find additional capacity, find additional logistics partners, change some of our own processes, right? And get new facilities. We've launched new fulfillment centers. I mean, we've completely changed the way we work.
So like with your customers, right? I guess I'm like hooked on like, all right, you have you know more demand than you've ever had. You have all these crazy. I mean, on top of just I think the basic operational complexities you would have as a company and just
Mm,
scaling and delivering on double demand. You also have all these different challenges in terms of what COVID did and
yeah.
people being out. I mean, when you're managing the customer experience there, like, I mean, did you find that customers were pretty, I assume there had to be hiccups there if things are growing like crazy and you're, operational challenges,
Yeah.
like that's inevitably what happens, despite, people's best efforts. So how'd you guys manage that?
Well, we obsess about customer experience and we track every error. So we track, quality, was were the ingredients spoiled, pick and pack, did we send you the wrong stuff, logistics, account management, all sorts of errors. And you were right, the error rates went up. And
Sure.
in some cases, they doubled or tripled. Now, fortunately, we had a very understanding customer base that also, was living COVID real time, understood some of the operational challenges and were willing to stay, through that. And we tried very hard to manage expectations. So, for example, if there is going to be an error, we try to be proactive in our notification because customers are much more likely to understand if you just tell them,
Yep.
right, rather than discover after the fact,
Yep.
right? So kind of small details like that we paid a lot of attention to. And, now as we kind of emerge from COVID into a post COVID world, these are our customers to retain. We have to continue to evolve with them, and their needs are changing.
Yep.
So, what worked for customers 2 years ago isn't necessarily, what's hot today. So, we've had to continue to adapt. I don't think the pace of change has slowed since COVID ended.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I mean, and no doubt, I think the customer evolves over time, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about the HelloFresh strategy is that I mean, it's not just HelloFresh. There's several other brands that have been acquired over time that more or less were strategically acquired for either just to acquire new customer bases or to fulfill different customer
Yeah.
needs. And I mean, I think we've talked about before. There's some other brands within HelloFresh that have seen actually continued growth even as COVID sort of has ended.
Absolutely. So, the aim of HelloFresh has been to be a food solutions group,
Hmm.
and the different brands are complementary to each other. Where we see the greatest growth right now is in kind of convenience foods. So, if you remember during COVID, everyone was baking bread and making these elaborate meals. They had a
Hmm.
lot of time on hand and were kind of bored at home,
Yep.
I think was part of the theme. And now that's ended. So people are going to restaurants, they're traveling, they're in Las Vegas, right? And so when they're at home, they want something that's nutritious, but less time intensive.
Yep.
So our Factor brand, which is our kind of heat and eat, ready to eat meal, no preparation required, microwavable, has seen tremendous growth through this because it meets this moment. And we've also looked at our other brands and tried to introduce more recipes, more variety, more options that are easy to prepare, and more kind of meal occasions, right? Because breakfast and lunch are also important
Yeah.
meals. There's a lot of different things we offer now as bundles to appeal to those occasions.
And so, and I know you're very much, sort of specialize in the whole idea of data-driven process excellence, right? And
Yeah.
with that evolution of customers over time, my assumption, right, is that like as things change, with just the overall world, right, in terms of hey, now I can actually go to a grocery store and I don't have to be 6 feet away from somebody,
Yeah.
right? I can actually, maybe I don't need that HelloFresh kit, but maybe I want that factor kit that's a little more
Yeah.
convenient, doesn't require me to cook. Like, how do you like? I guess how do you inform your current customer base of these new offerings that you guys were rolling out?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. Marketing is probably the most obvious way we do it. Certain promotions. We've recently started to focus more on retaining customers and having teams that focus on the experience of customers who have been with us for a while, and then other teams that focus on the new customer experience. Because what it takes to surprise and delight the
Hmm.
segments is different. Right.
Definitely.
And now we have kind of targeted teams that look at the kinds of offers, the kinds of promotions, um, the kinds of strategies from a marketing angle that better work for these different demographics. And we track in customer care, we track both of these very, very importantly. So, for example, we've worked together on VIP
Hmm.
treatments for our most loyal customers. And these are the ones that are most critical for us to retain. Some of them have been with us for years.
Hmm.
So we need to find ways to continue to surprise and delight them. And when we make a mistake, we need to own that in a really big way and make it up to them and show that we care about them as a customer. Meanwhile, on the other side of the spectrum, there's still a lot of new customers,
Yeah.
and 60% of contacts to customer care are from new customers. Maybe because the more loyal ones have already figured out how it works. They
Makes
know how to
sense.
pause their subscription. They know how to make meal changes, but others need a little more support with their account.
Makes sense. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting. So more or less, I guess strategically, what you guys have done on the CX front is you sort of segmented your team, right? Going, hey, like the experience, maybe a new customer has with us, needs to sort of be handled a little bit differently than someone that's been working with us for 2 years or something like that. And
Right.
I also know you guys have different ways of sort of also just managing all the different brands that sort of fall under the HelloFresh umbrella right now.
Absolutely. Everything that we're doing right now is around personalization. And
Hmm.
I think that's going to be a topic that continues to be like a hot topic for years to come, because if you can anticipate why someone would call, so you have that order history that says, oh, wow, this customer's, had a storm in their area,
Yep.
their delivery is probably late. You can come to that interaction already anticipating this is what this call is going to be
Yep.
about. This is how how we're going to remediate the case or what kind of compensation we're going to offer. Much more efficient, personalized interaction than like fishing for why they're contacting
It
us.
makes a ton of sense.
Yeah,
And I do actually, I want to come back to personalization really quick because I'm
sure.
very curious to get your perspective there in terms of tech. But I guess, I mean, just like while we're sort of on like these different teams you have managing it all, I mean, I think to me, like what's really interesting, like I'm relatively new to the CX space. I've been in it for 5 years, maybe. I guess technically, I've always been CX. I've been
Yeah.
working with customers, but I think what's like interesting about like the CX world is I think a lot of people have a tendency to look at it as just a cost center. Like,
Mm.
oh, like we have like it's support, right? We have to just we got to spend money. We got to make sure we're answering our customers a certain time, and that's definitely shifted. I think with e-commerce becoming sort
Mm.
of the way in which people buy things. Everything that happened with COVID, everyone sort of I think sees that CX is an awesome opportunity to sell and
Yeah.
to make your customers happy. And I mean, what's cool is it sort of seeing like what you guys are doing strategically. You very much look at call center as not just a cost center.
Absolutely. I think that's a fundamental kind of mindset that companies can choose to adopt, because customers will stay with you because they love your customer service,
Hmm.
especially since they've probably been around the block. They've probably used other e commerce companies, be it in food or other segments, and they know that good customer service is hard to find, right?
Hmm.
Someone who will understand your need, meet you in a fair way, it can be a real differentiator. And I think people absolutely will choose to stay with a brand because they've had a positive experience with customer service. And customers who I read some research, I probably will get it wrong, but customers who have had an issue addressed positively will be even more loyal than customers who had no issue at all.
Yeah.
And that to me is really
No,
interesting.
I've read
Right.
a lot about that, and I think that's sort of something that I think our company is really big on too. Is just I think it's unfortunate when something bad happens, right? The truth is, something bad's going to happen. Like
Right.
that's just the world we live.
Yeah.
It's probability, right? I mean, it's going to happen, but I think you have a huge opportunity like with that issue to sort of do something right, right? And if you can come in there and be that savior, you can score a lot of points and you can really win that customer back, right? Or
Yes,
even gain
absolutely.
upside that you didn't even know existed because you came in there and did a good job where most people wouldn't.
Absolutely. And that can take the many forms. It can take the form of, empathy and kindness from a customer service agent. It can take the form of the willingness to remake a box that was damaged in transit. There's a lot of error recovery solutions. And I think we're constantly open for new ideas, constantly looking for ways to, take that next level and differentiate ourselves through service.
Yeah, it's super cool with your background
Mhm.
too, with the McKinsey and Amazon. I mean, I can totally see it in terms of talking about innovating and sort of incubating new ideas. Like I definitely know that's something you guys do a lot of.
Yeah.
So I want to come back to personalization because you
Okay.
talked about that, and I know we've had a lot of conversations on the technology front. So I guess just high level, like when you think about sort of this like CX world in which personalization's king, like how does tech come into that? Because obviously you want smart tech, right?
Yeah.
But personalizing things, like when I think personalization, I think obviously something very, specific to me, but also I think of the empathy, right? I think of having a nice conversation
Yeah.
with someone. Think about calling, like, for example, I call an airline and like, I get someone that answers right away and that helps me out. I'm like, wow, like that's a huge relief. But like,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts in terms of like, what's happening with technology now with chat GPT and everything and how that impacts personalization, good or bad?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an incredible potential that has not fully been harnessed yet, and there's a lot of ideation and very little that's actually changed the way we work yet. But we're working on incubating it and bringing it to light. One very obvious way of personalization has nothing to do with generative AI, actually, but it's just identifying the customer when the call comes through
Mhm.
and linking it to their history, right? Having a full history of what this customer's preferences have been, how long they've been a customer, are they a VIP, and tailoring your treatment to the kinds to their specific situation. The next level then is, I think, tailoring it to the specific issue that you expect them to have, and that does take a little bit of predictive analytics
Sure.
to say, okay, hey, like to use my old example, we know we had a storm in your area. Your box is going to be delayed, but it's still going to be safe. It's still going to be delivered with all the ingredients, and this is the new date, and managing that expectation. And then, I think the next level then becomes this whole agent assist universe
Yeah.
that is, I think, been uncovered through ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. And, that's really more around the transformation of how our agents work and
Yeah.
what they work on. So, high volume, low complexity requests
Mhm.
are ripe for automation.
Sure.
A lot of what we get is really simple. Like, how do I find my tracking link? How do I pause my subscription? I'm traveling. Things of this nature are not even complaints,
Yeah.
right? They're just questions. And self service FAQs, chatbots, those are excellent avenues for what I call high volume, low complexity interactions. Then for the lower volume but higher complexity cases, this is where human judgment can add a lot of value.
Totally.
And I think agent assist tools as well can add a lot of value because if you look at the manual workload of a chat agent, for example, they might have up to 3 chats that they're working concurrently.
Yep.
It's a lot. It's a lot to keep track of. They're typing entire, sentences, paragraphs from scratch, right? Many times using the same wording, same phrasing over and over again. If you can have an agent assist tool powered by generative AI that is basically just predicting the next word, what is the most likely next word that will come,
Yep.
you can expedite a ton of that work. And I think ChatGPT and the likes are incredibly fluent,
Yep.
incredibly kind of well spoken, and sometimes they get the details wrong.
Yep.
Right? This is they're good in style, but not so good in substance for now.
Yep.
And I think this is where again an agent can step in, can provide, can fill in the blanks to moments or gaps in the ChatGPT flow. And because it is a learning system,
Yep.
those gaps or flaws will be corrected over time. And if you train it on the right data set and put guardrails around it, it will get better and better over time. And it's not to say that human judgment will be eradicated or replaced, not at all. But I think it'll allow people to focus their attention on the things where judgment really matters.
Yep.
And everything else will just be fast flow.
Fully agree. I mean, I love actually how you approach that question too, because I think when anyone thinks ChatGPT, everyone's like, oh my God, like 60% of people in this industry are going to lose their jobs in 5 years. And it's like, wow, that sounds ominous. Like
Yeah.
that sounds horrible. But I think like what I like about how you guys have always sort of looked at this and even just how like you answered my question there, like the first three things you said were really sort of up the alley of sort of agent assist. I think that's
Yeah.
what you sort of called it, where it's, more or less using this tech to allow our teams to work smarter so they can create a more personalized experience for the customer, right? I
Right.
mean, that's sort of first and foremost like the focus. Now, obviously, I think how you categorize, high volume, low complexity tasks. I mean, from my experience, sort of being on the services front, I mean, the truth is like that's where we have the most attrition because it's a lot of the work that's, it doesn't require that much critical thinking, right?
Right.
You don't really need to connect with the customer. So what I find is that I think people want that more complex work. They want that career progression. They want to take the next step, and usually the next step is a little more challenging. So to me, what I think is cool is like I think you guys are like, hey, like there's easy automation opportunities here. Whether it's answering, like having FAQ and making that actually usable FAQ, but then also making sure though you're really investing in allowing the people that touch your customers to work really smart. So, I
Yeah.
mean, and it seems like that's really where you guys are focused right now.
Yes, absolutely. And all of these technologies are going to be evolutions, not revolutions. I honestly believe that because there was a big splash around ChatGPT, but now it's kind of like, okay, well, how do we actually use this? And a
Yeah.
lot of experimentation going on. And what we're seeing is that there's no magic button and it just works and replaces human work,
Yep.
right? It takes a lot of tuning, a lot of experimentation, a lot of learning.
Yep.
And even then, it needs like some serious guardrails.
I've
So,
seen, I mean, I had a conversation with a person far more experienced and intelligent than myself last week. But, in the conversation I had with him, the big thing he said is that, look, all these different tech solutions are coming out, with all the developments on the chat GPT, et cetera,
Sure.
front. He's like, but the thing is, like, the truth is, like, customers are going to continue to drive what happens on the technology front. All these companies, all these vendors will come up with their different SaaS solutions, but the implementation will not be successful unless there's really truly sort of a customer, like, the company, the brand really driving that process and working with partners to sort of, I think, like you said, put some guardrails around it and experiment a little bit and see
Yeah.
what works, what doesn't. And, I think sort of balancing, how do you continue to make your customers happy today, but also how do we work smarter so that we can start, actually implementing some of this stuff so our customers feel us getting better.
Absolutely. And there is so much in addition that I think can be tapped into. So some of the tools are around customer sentiment analysis. And this is both at the personal level and at the aggregate level. So for example, being able to guide an agent on, hey, this customer sounds like they're in a hurry.
Yeah.
So maybe you can accelerate and just like cut out some of the niceties and get to the point, right? Because he's indicated in the call that he wants to go fast. Or you've just talked for a long time as an agent. Why don't you slow down, ask your customer if they understood everything you said,
Yep.
right? And there's a lot of new technologies that, again, as a form of agent assist, are doing sentiment analysis in the moment and providing cues to them for how they can have, greater connection with the customer.
Yep.
I think is really that. And then those tools bubble up to find aggregate trends,
Mhm.
right? Like maybe you've had a policy change and there's a lot of negativity around it.
Yep.
How do we find that data and mine it and use that to drive our product strategy?
Yeah.
In fact,
I mean, I think what's cool about, and just again, in conversations we've had about it, is I think your guys' sort of obsession with how do you make this as real time as possible?
yeah,
How do you get these insights as quickly as you can so that you can sort of, pivot what your team's doing strategically, whether it's like, hey, we just rolled out this new policy, like, how is it being received? Like, is it working? Is it not? Is it sort of meeting, exceeding our forecasts? Like, so I mean, it's stuff like that, I assume.
absolutely. And it's even, can be used in real life kind of daily situations. So, for example, it's a perishable product, it's a food product. If there's a food recall, or any kind of safety issue, we want to know about it right away. So if we see an uptick in complaints about a certain product, right, we want to know about that, as soon as we see that trend emerge so we can take it back to our food safety team and see like, hey, is something going on here? Because we're
Yeah.
now getting a lot of complaints about a certain ingredient, for example.
Makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
So more or less, so I mean, it sounds like, I mean, for a company like HelloFresh, CX is incredibly important on so many different fronts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we're just starting to find mechanisms to link in better with the rest of our organization and going from kind of more siloed approaches that were like, oh, the marketing team is working on the marketing strategy and customer care is working on, their whatever they're working on, and everyone is working in sort of their functional silos
Hmm.
into a more collaborative structure where people problem solve together and they bring insights together and work on solutions together as well.
Because I'm curious, like, I mean, I know, for example, with your guys' operation, there's tons of different data points being collected every single day.
Mhm.
I mean, and I'm always, I mean, I see this with a lot of, different people we work with. There's all this data being generated.
Yeah.
Like, how is that data being used across the entire organization?
I think it's probably the next opportunity. It's one of the biggest opportunities because we're almost like lost in the data
Yeah.
sometimes. And we there's either a tendency to look at historical metrics. So like AHT, we've always measured that.
Hmm.
That has to make sense, right? Or like I don't know, speed of answer, like very traditional call center metrics.
Yeah.
And that's kind of everyone's sweet spot.
Yeah.
Right. Like got to get those right. But we're trying to get to the next generation of are we surfacing trends that are useful to our product team? Are we giving feedback to our marketing teams about how campaigns are being received?
Yeah.
Right. Do people feel like we're being authentic to our promises, right? And sticking to our marketing promises, things like that. And that's the inflection that we're trying to drive. And when we look at the KPI decks, they're still too focused in my mind on traditional call center metrics
Yeah.
and not enough on those voice of customer insights.
And how do you, like, from like across like departmental sort of collaboration standpoint, right?
Mm.
You mentioned silos and sort of data living in different places. And I guess, putting on your McKinsey hat here, right? Because I mean, I see this
Yeah.
across different organizations. And, I will say the thing that's really surprised me the most about the CX world, because I'm going to call center. People are like, wow, like cool career move, Sean. Like, but I mean, as you dig in, you're like, wow, like, the amount of data
Yeah.
you have access to is incredible in terms of understanding your customer.
Yeah.
But I think, I think what I found is that a lot of that data isn't really being shared, or a lot of the work that the CX teams are doing isn't necessarily, I think, being actioned, across the organization. So I guess,
Yeah.
with that McKinsey, I mean, how do you actually get that collaboration to start happening?
One way has been through voice of customer sessions. And we have started organizing this and are getting really good traction. So, for example, we will pull interactions that just have logistics wrap codes. And we invite the logistics team and we just have them listen. Right. And it can be painful at times, right?
Pretty
Like
uncomfortable, I'm
here,
sure.
yeah, pretty uncomfortable of like, hey, the tracking link doesn't work, or, you know, I'm elderly and I can't I've asked you 10 times to leave the product at my front door, but you keep leaving it by the garage and it's incredibly inconvenient, right? And, you know, making a systematic effort to eradicate those anecdotes,
Yep.
right? And to take them very seriously because I think a lot can be brushed aside and to say that's it's just one person, it's just one person's
Yep.
experience. And data can be a source of paralysis. I will caution with that
Yep.
because you can always say, well, show me more data. I'm not convinced, right? But we really challenge the teams to take the listening session, take the learnings, and come out with just a few actionable next steps that they're going to change in terms of the product, in terms of the way we communicate, the way our logistics partners work with us, all of those things.
Yeah. No, I think it's fairly easy to manipulate data to sort of support a narrative that you're
Yeah.
trying to push. But I think it's the context, right, that kind of matters. And and it
Yeah.
sounds like how you guys kind of do it is the whole voice of customer. It's like, hey, like here are the data points. Here's the data. Like this is why we're
Yeah.
here. Now you get to context. Now let's listen to some of the customers. And
Absolutely. And we've started to look proactively at social media forums, but also ratings platforms. So, Better Business Bureau, Yelp, all the different groups for that are exist on Instagram, on Facebook. There's a lot of communities, and they're not reaching out to us. So this isn't necessarily a customer care moment because they're not asking for help,
yeah,
and there's no question. But you can look at the sentiment.
yeah,
How many of these are positively inclined versus negatively inclined? What are they talking about? And really take that to heart,
yeah.
right? Because they're very unfiltered conversations and some of them are,
Yeah,
brutal.
you'll get the brutal like
Yeah,
truth, right?
you're gonna get it whether you want it or not, but it's out there, right? And anyone can access these things.
So, and it's just a matter of sort of tapping into that and sort of seeing what the brutal truth is, and
Yeah.
but also using that as a better way to gauge sort of, I guess, sentiment, if you will, and building that into like what the company does strategically.
Absolutely. And never talking it down. So one of the things that I really don't like to see, and I think is very serious, is like talking down negative reviews, or so saying things like, well, who really looks at the Better Business Bureau? Like, who
Sure.
really cares about that? Like that, nobody uses that. Well, it's like, okay, are you saying that because you don't like what's been written there?
Yeah.
Or, and are we really inviting critique? I think the best companies invite critique. They
Yeah.
want to know what they're doing wrong so they can be better rather than kind of take a blinkered
Yeah.
approach.
So you guys are more or less looking for more areas or different sources of information to sort of tell you that brutal truth.
Well, absolutely, because like I said, we acquired a lot of customers during COVID and they're ours to lose.
Yep.
So, many customer acquisition is harder because we've already exposed much of the US to our product. They've at least heard of it. Some people have tried it and maybe paused it or stepped away from it. And we want to kind of re engage with them, teach them about how our offering has changed because it's changed a ton. And we've improved a ton as a company. So we want to find, a way to be exciting again to customers that maybe have lapsed.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I have to ask on the outsourcing front and
Yes.
BPOs. I mean, was HelloFresh sort of the first time you were exposed to sort of that world, or I assume you may have touched that world in your McKinsey Amazon days, or
Oh, yeah. I touched that world before, maybe not necessarily from a customer care lens, but outsourcing and offshoring have been around forever, in certainly in manufacturing contexts. Many of the goods we buy, certainly the clothes we wear, many things are, they might have an American label on them, but they're manufactured abroad. And a lot of the work that I did in the past helped companies move their supply chain abroad for the economies that they could get, but also from skill advantages because certain parts of the world are considered capability hotspots, and you want to be there, right, to tap into that resource
totally.
pool. So I did a lot of work on that and helping companies paint that journey and actually do it in bite-sized pieces and earn trust along the way. And it's exactly that journey we did. I always knew though, like in the kind of in my heart of hearts, that this would be feasible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense. No, I mean, I guess just as we sort of wrap here, I mean, we have this whole thing, right? Stay wild.
Yeah.
And for us, stay wild is, I mean, it can mean a lot of things. I think for me, the big part is like, be who you are, be
Yeah.
comfortable being
Yep.
you, because usually when you're comfortable, that's when you do your best work. You're the best version of yourself. But I guess for HelloFresh and for you personally, like, how do you guys sort of do the whole stay wild thing?
Yeah. I mean, we're a company, I think, that is based in authenticity, and food is a convener. The whole product is about getting families and friends together over food. And that, I think, is a moment where everyone can, stay wild or be their true self and just kind
Family
of
dinners can get a little wild.
family dinners can get wild. Friends, dinners with friends for sure can get wild. So we want to think of our product as something that fosters that,
Yeah,
right? And we have the same philosophy that people are at their best when they're themselves,
totally.
right? So we want to create a space where people can do that.
I love it. Very cool. Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much, Elaine.
thank you.
Appreciate you coming here today. And
Yeah,
I think it'll be a fun evening on the strip.
yeah.
So awesome.
Looking forward to it.
Huge shout out to Brittany Kelly and Carly Corolla at FW Rentals in lovely Las Vegas, Nevada for their support in custom logo work. FW Rental provides rental and custom build-out solutions for all of your event and production needs. We love you, Brittany and Carly. Learn more at fwrental.com. That's fwrental.com. And that's our show. CX&Chill is a production of Exo Studios, the creative marketing arm of XtendOps. With today's host, Sean McCreery, executive producer Sean McCreery, producers David Spear, Clarissa Coronado, and Memo Davalos, editors and videographers Santiago Aguirre, Alfonso Ramirez, graphic support from Jordan Madrid, and social media guru Claudia Corona.